All right, welcome, one and all to another exciting FSMA Friday. I know you've all been counting down the minutes in anticipation, as I have been. Well, my name is Jim Albright, and it is great to be back with you all, you wonderful food safety fans out there, as we look today at how to deal with the main cause of withdrawals and recalls. Yep, we are talking about allergen-related issues, mistakes, and oversights, and we have a great speaker to help us get to the bottom of it all. But for those who are new to the FSMA Friday series, thanks for joining us. We're absolutely thrilled that you're here. This series is a collaboration between the Acheson Group, who is a global leader in food safety and compliance consulting services, and Safety Chain. We are responsible for the world's best digital plant management platform, which helps food and beverage manufacturers digitize plant-wide processes to make faster, more informed decisions for optimizing things like compliance and production operations. Now, FSMA Friday is your place to get updates, insights, and guidance around the Food Safety Modernization Act, and it's your chance to get some of your questions answered by our food safety experts over at TAG. Now, as you guys can see, we have a benchmark survey that we're offering at the end of this series. So please stay tuned. We'll give you the link to that at the end. All right, let's get to our presenter. I am absolutely thrilled to welcome back Dr. Lily Yang. She is the Senior Manager of Food Safety over at the Acheson Group. And I'm sure many of you longtime followers of the show remember Lily, who has over a decade of experience in this food industry. And she has a big focus on communication within your plants, throughout your organization, and of course, throughout your supply chain. So this is going to be a fun one, Lily. Welcome back.
Thank you so much, Jim. Oh, so excited to be here. Yes.
All right. Now, I think we have a few FSMA updates you're going to share, right?
Yes, sir.
All right, let's go.
Let's get at it. Hi, everyone. Welcome. And thank you to Safety Chain for having us. And thank you, Jim, for the awesome introduction. So today we're going to start with, obviously, as you all know, the FDA regulatory updates. The first thing for everyone, the FDA's next food safety culture webinar, and don't worry, we'll talk about food safety culture today as well, is going to be on September 3rd at 12 p.m. Eastern. It's going to be, quote, how to turn a problem into an opportunity. And let's be honest, everything we're doing is an opportunity anyway. So this is going to be great. You can sign up on their FDA's website as well. I think this is like number 1 or number 2 or some number out of like 12 that they're supposed to be doing. So it's going to be awesome. Check it out. Additionally, something we wanted to talk about is the FDA is currently proposing to revoke 52 outdated food standards for items like canned fruits, dairies, baked goods, all in an effort to modernize the standard of identities and reduce unnecessary regulations around that. So take a look at that notice has already come out. I think it came out about 2 weeks ago, so you can find it online. Additionally, the FDA is seeking input on a new method for ranking chemicals in food for post-market assessment, right? They opened this up for comment period back in June, but they have since, as of like a few days ago on July 15th, extended that comment period. So if you have thoughts on how we should be ranking chemicals in food for post-market assessments, hit them up and leave them a comment. Finally, the FDA also has released their 2025 Human Foods Program Guidance Agenda, and there are 3 new aspects for you to consider on there. Number 1, they've added some action levels for opiate alkaloids on poppy seeds. Another one, they're talking about food colors derived from natural sources like fruit juice and veggies, juice as color additives, etc. in food. There's a new draft guidance for that as well. And finally, they also have new draft guidance for new dietary ingredient notifications and related issues. So that's also really cool. You can check that out online. That just came out a few weeks ago as well. And there's two updates from USDA. If some of y'all had heard yesterday, USDA is going to currently go under a restructuring and is moving many of its individuals who are in the Washington capital area out towards 5 different hubs. On the other hand, as well, at the opening of the USDA's new Midwestern Food Safety Lab in Missouri, USDA has also unveiled a 5-part plan to strengthen food safety, including stricter inspections, enhanced listeria testing, and targeted efforts to reduce salmonella. So if you have some time, take a quick look-see at the news brief that has also come out. So those are our regulatory updates, and hopefully that will be helpful for you as you look ahead for the next few months.
All right. Wow, that's a lot of updates here from FSMA. Okay, let's get into allergens. Holy moly.
Oh my gosh. Okay, y'all. This is going to be a long vibe of a conversation today. And you're going to probably be like, oh yeah, these first few slides, I just want to make sure we're all on the same page, that we're all talking the same language. So we're going to kind of start with an introduction about allergens versus intolerances, and then move on to the actual meet and greet of which you are here for today. All right. Shall we go to the next slide, please? All right. Thank you. Let's talk really quickly about allergies versus intolerances, just in case, right? So allergies is very much an immune system reaction. Pretty much it's your body attacking itself, right? And so it can lead to it can usually be an immediate reaction. Maybe you start getting like a little itchy hives. Maybe, you start having other issues like maybe your GI is feeling funky, etc. One can literally die from a food allergy depending on how allergic you are to something, right? Because there are really actually no minimum level by which we know certain people can get sick versus others. It is going to be different for everyone. So this is an allergy, and this is what we're really, really focused on for the most part when it comes to FSMA, when it comes to food safety, when it comes to your prerequisite programs, right? On the other hand, we also have food intolerances. And this is usually things that we see in food digestive systems, right? If you got that boo-boo belly, if you're like me and you're lactose intolerant, 6 hours after drinking milk, I'm just rolling around and being crop dusting everything. It's a whole vibe. I know, not very professional, but for someone to know, it is very uncomfortable, right? However, it does not necessarily mean you can't eat this. It just means you will be uncomfortable. So in this case, it's not as thought about when we come to think about allergies or like what is pertinent towards labeling, etc. But we will talk about intolerances as it relates to sulfites a little bit later on. But really, when we talk about food safety, we are trying to control for allergenic ingredients and to prevent folks from getting allergic reactions, which may kill them. And that would be real bad.
Oof.
Oof. All right, so in the US, as we all know, there are 9 allergens. I don't need to repeat them, but I definitely would like to re-highlight that if you happen to have sesame and you have not reviewed your food safety plan as of late, please take a quick see, because sesame has, for the past 3 years, now been one of the new allergenic products. But what does this look like for other countries that are out there, right? If you are interested, you should also check out FARPA's website, which is it's all the resourcing for food allergens, and it's hosted under University of Nebraska's Institute of Ag and Natural Resources. And they literally have an entire site, like table, as you see on the screen right there, of what different countries consider allergens, right? So we think about countries like Canada, for example. Canada has extra allergens that are required for labeling, up to and including things like mustard, sulfites, and other countries also have like fruits like peaches and pears and apples on their list as well. So I do want to talk about this real quick, because it's going to depend obviously on what country you're actually importing from, exporting to, or utilizing. Of course, we're focusing FSMA on the US, but when you think about things like sulfites, right? Sulfites, while they are a food additive, they are grouped in some countries as an allergen, because although it is often an intolerance, the symptoms that people will get from consuming from consuming sulfites can actually be more reflective of an allergy-like symptoms than just digestive systems. And therefore, for many different places, you may have to label sulfites if it is above a certain concentration. So that's just something to make sure we're all on the same page about. And if everyone was wondering why we got sulfites on labels on some places and not others, that's why. All right. So we should talk about why it's important to talk about allergens in the first place. So in the US, allergen-related recalls still remain the #1 set of all recalls out there. And this isn't even talking about things that have gone through market product withdrawal, right? Product withdrawal and recalls, right? Just a reminder for everyone, so we're all on the same page using the same alphabet ABC playbook out there. Market withdrawal is when the product is still within you, as the manufacturer's control, right? So that you can bring it. It has not gone, and it has not gone to be consumer facing. It has not had the potential to have been picked up or bought by the consumer. On the other hand, a recall is when, for example, something has gone out to the consumer and you're like, oh no, something has gone wrong, and you have to bring it back, right? So it has already gone public facing, the consumer has access to it. That's when we have a recall. So like I said, in the US, allergen-related recalls still remain the #1 situationship when it comes to allergens and recalls, right? And again, there are no real values out there detecting market withdrawals because, we don't really track that. Well, we track the recalls itself. And while total recalls are trending slightly downwards in 2025, I guess we're 7 months in now. Literally, we're half a year in, y'all. 2025 has gone so fast. Allergen-related recalls are up 16% compared to what we saw in 2024 at this time. Like, that's insane. And you're going to be like, wait, but tell me why, right? And you all can think of why. But real quick, what you see on the screen here is also put out by FARP as well. And on the left, you will see from 2002 to 2025, the number of FDA food allergen recall incidences, right? And then on the right, you'll see the ones related to USDA food allergen recalls since 2001 to now. And it's interesting because you do see where there are more spikes and whatnot. Apparently in 2023, we had quite a few recalls and alerts. 2024, less so. 2025, we're picking back up on all of these counts. So that's also really interesting, right? And then the question is, why does this happen? Well, the #1 reason for all of these recalls that may happen is often due to mislabeling or undeclared allergens, right? So either we thought we put X product in this package and it was the wrong product, or, hey, that package did not have all the labels, all the specific type of food products of which are allergenic ingredients listed on that. And in fact, product label mismatch is the greatest source of all recalls. And we're going to talk about cross-contamination during production next. But and we do worry about that as well. But I just want to remind everybody that labeling process and that mislabeling is the #1 of all the reasons for the allergen-related recalls out there. And of course, there is cross-contamination during production, right? When we think about cross-contamination, we're going to talk a lot about what are some actual ways we can be preventing cross-contamination or even just thinking about it as we move forward. And with cross-contamination during production, that can be really important because you don't want there to be non-allergenic and allergenic aspects that can cross. Because again, remember, there is no limit for everybody. Everybody's going to be different if you are allergic to something as to how many of the protein molecules will actually impact you, right? So ideally, it should be 0 of the allergenic protein particles available. And finally, something that we really want to highlight in this whole discussion is the importance of supplier-related issues and how that also contributes to how we manage allergens and whatnot. Because let's be honest, relationships can be hard and so can communication, given that we may have such a busy schedule, right? And so how do we keep up with that? And what are things that we should be looking for? And we'll talk about that later in the next few slides. All right. So let's talk about how everything is related under FSMA. Again, I know many of y'all are like, well, we know all this. I just want to make sure that we're all playing on the same page before we start that deep dive. So let's start first with what we know best. May contain, processing facility, made on shared equipment, right? The whole precautionary labeling. First and foremost that I am going to tell you, precautionary labeling will not save your butt when it comes to something bad that has happened. Just because you have put precautionary label that, oh, this may contain, etc., that is no excuse for you not to put together a great allergen control plan, to have good GMPs, to have all these aspects in your system taken care of to eliminate allergens as much as you can. This will not protect you against regulatory incursions of any sort. You have this as a perhaps warning. But then if you have these labels, your next question to yourself should be, why do I have this label? Do you have this label because one of your customers wants you to? Or do you do this because you think it will be helpful in case you miss something? And I'm going to tell you right now, it won't be. So we'll move on because we'll talk about how that looks like, right? Ideally, we want to manage all our allergens through an allergen control plan. And of course, there's the parts of the prerequisite, right, versus what is required under FSMA. When we think of prerequisite programs, we think of things like color coding, segregation, using stickers out there, right? And sometimes it will be using different colors. But the most important part I want to point out to y'all here is if you do use stickers, we highly best practice recommend that you actually use stickers with pictograms. Why? Because you may have a very diverse workforce. Not everyone's going to be reading and writing in the same language, but everyone knows what pictures look like, especially with a tiny pictogram. So that will be very helpful. And it's always obvious to also think that different people have different accessibility types. Some people may not see color in the same way that you may. Some people may not hear things in the same way you may, taste things, etc. Right? So you want to make it, especially because allergens are so important, because again, you don't want people to die. You want to make sure that it is easy to be communicated. Additionally, we think about how we talk about segregation. Oh, I love it. Thank you for pulling this up. Remember that allergens must be segregated by their specific subtype. So even though we say tree nuts is an allergen, right? Tree nuts can be together, right? However, if you have cashews and pine nuts and Brazil nuts, etc., each of these need to be segregated separately. They cannot be on top of each other, right? Because if you put cashews above pine nuts, these are technically two separate allergens. And as a person who is very pine nut allergic, I can eat every other nut but pine nuts, right? So if there was a spill of pine nuts onto something else that was held below it, now I might get sick and die. And that would be a whole situationship. The other thing I really want to highlight here is this, and I've seen this very frequently, and you're probably rolling your eyes being like, psh, Lily, no way. And I'm like, yes way. A lot of times we now have a plethora of different types of non-dairy based products. And some of these non-dairy based products are still, they call themselves yogurts or milks, etc. like that. I am a person who, as you have now probably guessed, consume these. However, cashew-based yogurt is not a dairy product. So please ensure when you are storing cashew yogurt that you are actually storing it in the nut section with other cashew products and not in the dairy section. And I know that sounds very silly, but I have seen this so many times in the last 6 years that I just feel like it would be very good to remind folks. This is the same also with different types of milks and cashew. I think they have almond butter out there. Someone actually put almond butter with dairy, and I was like, no. This is made out of almonds. There are zero dairy in this, right? So knowing also your ingredients and what are in the products, not only that you are making or that you are bringing in, very important as well. And of course, once we talk about the prereq programs, right, this is controlling the basics of that food safety, then we level everything to the allergen preventive controls, right? When we think of allergen preventive controls as part of your food safety plan, there's all these other aspects to consider, right? Ingredient and raw material hazard analyses, what this looks like with sanitation preventive controls, supply chain preventive controls, etc. So we will talk further about this, I believe, in the next slide. Maybe? Perfect, we do. Thank you. So we're going to talk about allergen preventive controls, right? Because that's like we had all our prereqs, took care of the background basics, and now we're up leveling to, oh gosh, we need to make sure that there's no potential for allergens to get into the product, because this is really, really important. So number one, first and foremost, and this is something I really want to stress, is I feel that lately I've been going to a lot of sites that have not done their own ingredient or raw material hazard analysis. And if you have allergens, that should be part of your supply chain preventive controls. Like, you should know which of your ingredients or raw materials or even chemicals that you are bringing in for cleaning may or may not contain allergens, and how that may or may not impact what you're making. And it's surprising to see so many companies not have their ingredient hazard analysis, which, by the way, is also part of your food safety plan, that I'm like, oh, okay. So that's why I'm bringing it up with y'all. So if you don't have a fully written out ingredient hazard analysis or raw materials hazard analysis that also looks at other inputs, including the chemicals that you are bringing in on site for cleaning, lubrication, etc., you might want to consider that, because that is and should be part of either your prereq program or your supply chain preventive control. On the other hand, sometimes from your suppliers, as you're going through your ingredient hazard analysis, they'll have a precautionary label statement. And so they may say may contain or be produced in a facility with XYZ. And then you're like, wait, do I have to carry that through into my labeling? And the answer is maybe, maybe not. Number one, how much do you trust your supplier? Number two, is it imperative for them to have the may contains? Are they doing it for their customers? Or are their GMPs just so poor and sanitation practices just so poor that they are not doing it and therefore they include it? And if so, like, should they be your supplier? Think about that, right? So these are things, and we'll talk more about this may contains and how you should or should not evaluate that according to your suppliers in the next bit. From there, we're also going to think about like production line food allergen assessments that are needed as part of your allergen preventive control, right? Because if you have specific and or distinct allergens, how are you running that? How are you scheduling that? At what point, are you running all your non-allergens first, then you're adding all your allergenic products at the end? What does your shutdown mean? What does cleaning? And I do want to stress this as well, because lately I seem to have had this conversation with different folks, is number one, when it comes to allergen cleaning and sanitation, cleaning, the physical action of your scrubbing, kind of like when we, wash our hands with soap, and using like cleaner is what actually removes allergen from surfaces or areas, right? Sanitizing has no impact on allergens. Remember, and I know some of this is basic and some of y'all are like, why are you saying this? Just as a reminder, because this has come up a few times this past week alone, is we are sanitizing is only for microbial elimination. Sanitizing does nothing for allergenic removal. It is the sheer act of cleaning, right? Just like we swab for ATP after we clean, before we sanitize, same too is what we should be doing for if you do allergen swabbing. But I do want to remind everyone that according to the FDA, the only way we can actually fully know if you've done a good job cleaning is through visually clean. And then some of y'all be like, well, what about swabbing, etc.? Yes, it is good to have swabbing if you want to add it as well. But swabbing is, number one, only as good as the person that is doing the swabbing. And number two, the moment of swabbing, because where are you going to be swabbing, right? And something else to keep in mind is not all allergens have rapid tests. Some allergens are protein-based and don't test well post-cleaning chemicals. And finally, remember, we only detect what's on the surface. But if an area is poorly cleaned, perhaps the allergenic is not identified beneath a biofilm, especially depending on how that piece of equipment is. And we'll talk about that as well. And finally, the last part of the allergen preventive control that we always need to remember is food allergen label verification. How do we make sure the right label is on the right product from what we received as raw ingredients and what is going out of our system? All right, so now that I have covered all the basics, let's hop into beyond the basics and what we want to talk about, right? We talked about, I know part of what we're going to talk about is what different protocols can you put into place that work, that should be supportive. So in that, first and foremost, I want to give a giant shout out to my team for their support in putting this together. We actually have multiple SMEs, as you see on the screen here, who are very focused on allergens. So we got Dr. Joe Skamika, Mary Hoffman, Dr. Liliana Casal-Wardo, Lacey, and Ranjit Claire. All of them are really, really, really big into the allergen field and always keeping up to date. And they actually also provided a lot of good input for this presentation today. So again, a big shout out to them. And I want you all to keep in mind, everything we're talking about today not only applies to you or whomever you is that's listening, but it's also applicable to your suppliers and even their suppliers. And actually not just them, but even your customers. Like this, everything we're going to talk about is applicable to everyone except consumers, obviously. Duh. And yes, you can come at me for that because they're just doing their thing and eating the product. But all of this is applicable to everybody on the chain. So things to think about too when you think about approaching your own suppliers, your customers, and understanding your suppliers' suppliers. All right. First and foremost, let's talk about allergen segregation between distinct allergens and allergen storage, etc. Right? Some of this can be, related to your prerequisite programs and your allergen control plans, and other parts of this can be related to your preventive controls. But again, remember to what we said, pictograms. Be using pictograms, so useful. Be exact, right? So an example of this I might think about is, we're going to talk about pictograms. I tend to skip around, so yes. Make sure you're using pictograms. Make sure you're understanding different color or visual impairments and utilizing other cues, right? And if you're segregating a space, I know that not all of us have warehouses that have all the space. Let's be real. It's just one of those situationships. We got as much space as we don't or do have. So if you do have separate types of allergens that you can't keep separately, that's great. Otherwise, make sure that your non-allergenic products above your allergenic products, right? So then you can have them all in a row on the bottom. Additionally, I really, really want to re-highlight to y'all the subcategorical segregation, right? So when we think about fish products, for example, there's let's say there's a salmon product, a halibut product, a cod product, a perch product. Each of these type of fishes, sorry, this is the time I use the plural. Each of these type of fishes are going to be separated separately, right? So your pictogram or whatever picture, you will literally say salmon, perch, cod, right? You need to be very distinct. And the same again with cashews and pine nuts. And again, also I do want to highlight as well, milk. It's not just cow milk that people are allergic to too. Goat milk, buffalo milk, yak milk, that's a lot of milk, llama milk, whatever kind of milk you're using, that should also be stored separately as well, right? Because they also have different types of allergens therein. Some people can drink and process goat milk better than they can, cow milk, etc. So being cognizant of that and how you separate that, and their different types of sub-products, right? Like butter or yogurt or any of that aspect. So think about that. And this level of management must be reflected also in your production schedule. So ideally, with each and every different food allergen that you have out there, that not only do you have a unique color that helps reinforce and distinctly manage it, but that you can also control that also into the floor so folks understand that this thing will go through an entire process as part of your production schedule, and that if that means you have to be changing smocks, doing different things, closing areas off, etc., that we do all that. Cool. So then the other thing we want to talk about is understanding your lines, right? Just like your production lines. So just as with allergen preventive controls, you do need to think about what your production schedule looks like. So first and foremost, we definitely highly recommend that you do a deep dive risk assessment of your production lines where allergens are run, not just on shared equipment, but as it is, right? So one of your big questions should be, well, how are my lines laid out? Are products going up a belt, across other belts, going under belts, etc.? What is happening here, right? And understanding that too, also, where are my raw ingredient silos? So the reason I'm bringing this up is because recently, a few years back, I was at a facility where their raw ingredient silos, these giant silos, were really right next to finished product coming out of an oven, of which there were different allergens that would have not been in the. First of all, that's a microbial risk, right? Given how close it was, but also, and how the airflow goes, but also if there are allergenic ingredients in your silos that are not also part of whatever raw final product will be coming out, now you have a potential for allergenic transfer, right? So understanding how that looks like, and then thinking about where are my fans? How are people crossing over, right? Where is air blowing? Are my fans have filters, right? And some processes also use air to blow empty wrappers at the packaging step. So will this also, depending on the force of the air, depending on how the containment for this empty wrapper space, how does this look like it increasing or decreasing the risk of cross contact for exposed products? And I just want to bring up here as well, remember, in FDA language now, cross-contamination is for biological and physical. Cross-contact is for allergens, so right? It's no longer cross-contamination, it's cross-contact for allergens, right? So that's something for us to think about as well. And we also want to consider what is exposed are allergens on separate lines in different spaces and rooms, right? Some places will decide, well, we have enough space to create our own allergen room, our allergen space. Cool, that would be awesome. But how are you also managing folks walking in or out from within these facilities? Or are people dedicated to that line, right? Because it'd be real dumb for a person in an allergenic room to just willy-nilly enter the other side with non-allergenic and cross right by lines in production of non-allergenic product, because there's smocks and stuff, if they haven't changed it out, might contain allergenic product that, might also drift off. So that's also aspects to think about as well. And you also want to think about your air handling and management. And I know some people are like, oh, but this is part of our PM, Lily. We already do this. The thing is, unfortunately, I feel like I've seen a lot of places where this isn't actually managed as well, right? So let's say you're using a separate space, its own room for allergenic aspects. In that case, you want that room to be at a negative air pressure. Why? Because you want to ensure that everything that is allergenic is contained within that room, right? So if you have that connected to your HVAC, you also want to make sure that none of that goes back into the primary facility, right? So how does your HVAC system look? And being part of that work with your mechanic group, with systems, etc., very helpful. Additionally, if you are using fans to blow air, just general fans, the first question I would ask you is why? Why are you using fans? Do they have filters? Is it doing something for you? And if so, what does this look like for particulates that get aerosolized? So doing that risk assessment will be very helpful for you, especially let's also think about let's doing everything on the same line. So how are you also protecting different lines when you're doing cleaning, maybe halfway through the day, etc. So just things to think about. It's important for you to understand your production lines. From there, we're going to talk about understanding your equipment. And this is where it's so important. Number one, can each piece of equipment be disassembled, or are they all clean in place? And you know what we got to tell you right here? It is so important for you to work with your maintenance crew and your operator crew. Why? Because although food safety, quality, regulatory, we're pretty cool cats, ultimately, when it comes to breakdown, etc., the maintenance and operators, they know the ins and outs of what is happening. And remember, we talked about food safety culture. We should all be part of that conversation, and they should too. Not only does it create a sense of ownership, but it also ensures that you understand where the pain points might be, right? Because when you think about equipment design and hygienic design as a whole, we need to consider not just like the piping of the lines, but also the assessment of how cleaning practices are. Because ultimately, if a piece of equipment cannot be fully taken apart and each part clean, you then run the risk of having hidden allergens in little elbows and gaskets and that tiny corner where that tiny little screw is out there, right? And let's be honest, although it can be visually clean on the outside, that particle might be on that tiny screw out in that corner you couldn't reach. And how are you going to be swabbing that? Let's be real. Most people are just swabbing to swab, right? So if it doesn't come apart completely, you may be missing corners in your cleanliness. And remember, there is no regulatory limit for the minimum number of allergenic protein particles out there that will make someone clean. So again, sick, not clean, sick. So to that end, right, visually clean is important, but also understanding too what you are missing if your equipment or your area of line is not easily managed when it comes to that cleaning and sanitizing aspect. Because remember, cleaning is the only way to truly ensure that you can get allergen removed. So again, please work with your multidisciplinary teams as part of this situation. All right. I think we were going to next talk about allergen cleaning, verification, and validation, right? So first and foremost, I do want to talk about with everything, and I should have led with this in the entire, if there's nothing you'll leave with this entire conversation today, is literally trust but verify. Everything, all the things. My face is serious, please, all the things. But in that, right, everyone always wants a reminder about validation, verification, especially when it comes to aspects. So when we talk about FSMA and the food safety plan, et cetera, right, what truly needs to be validated are process preventive controls. Allergen preventive controls do not necessarily need to be validated, but sometimes folks want to know how effective and to show that their cleaning method actually works. And the verification part is what we do with the sanitation, is the ongoing checks, the visual checks. Was the clean done properly? Something worth considering though, because a lot of times people may do, like we said, the first and foremost of verification is visually clean. But let's say you're like, well, we just want to make sure that we removed, I don't know, egg or dairy or whatever it is off, and we're going to do a quick swab. That's awesome. But something that might be also worth considering as well is considering the presence of unknown or not present allergen verifications post-clean. It might be worth doing that. So what does that mean? So on occasion, it may be worth considering doing allergen swabs of allergens not present or in production or product lines, because you want to ensure that those allergens did not get in here due to, I don't know, poopy GMPs that you have going on. And it is suggested every once in a while to test those allergens which are not present in your product or on your production lines. And the reason this actually came up, and this comes from one of my colleagues, is they had a situation where a facility did not have walnut present in the facility, but they got some notification that people were like, oh, why is there walnut vibes, right? So they tested for walnut on a food contact surface post-cleaning, and it was positive for walnut. And so it's like, oh my gosh, like you're not supposed to have walnuts here. How did that happen? And so with the CAPA, they realized that actually the maintenance team was bringing in a hand scrub soap for washing heavily soiled hands. That scrub, to get all that nasty off, had walnut husk as a scrubbing agent in the ingredients. So the walnut was inadvertently being added to the facility, even though it shouldn't have been by the maintenance team, right? So there is something to be said about understanding how well your GMPs or how well your prerequisite programs are doing by simply testing for allergens that aren't supposed to be there. Okay. So I know many of y'all are probably also thinking, let's talk about suppliers, because what is going to happen with my suppliers and how do they impact me? So I'd ask if everyone has a supplier expectation manual on here, and I'm sure you'll all tell me you do. But my question for you is this: have you looked at it lately? And could you tell me in detail what all the details are? And were they all enough details that your suppliers were able to follow all of them? Or were they kind of hard to understand? Because this thing is, it is hard to understand the supply chain control sometimes begin with the manual. And many companies just assume that like when they receive, like that's the vibe and it's going to be okay. But realistically speaking, not everyone understands what's on the manual themselves. And as we see with many of our clients, the manual can often be either very, very, very short or very, very, very long that contains a vast amount of information that, you know, honestly, it's just sometimes easier to skim through, right? And they may not read all of it until a problem arises. And sometimes what we see is when there's recall or withdrawal situations happening, the supplier manual, maybe sales will actually pick up the manual to see who is responsible. And then they'll be like, wait, we don't actually understand what's written in this manual, right? So that's something we're going to talk about. And also something we want to ask you is, do you know what your supplier's supplier is even doing? Like, if not, then yikes, because that's also where we see a lot of issues. Many times, too, when it comes to allergens, whether it be precautionary labeling or just allergens that have been carried through, we do see our supplier being that cause of that allergen issue. Your supplier may have a strong supplier management program, obviously, but have they focused on the allergen management program of their suppliers, right? And this is where the trust but verify would come in. You may want to consider having that discussion with your suppliers, because remember, it's all about having a relationship. And obviously, we're here to produce money and produce safe food without shortcuts that will make us get further along. And ideally, you know, we don't want folks to die. So I'm going to shout it from this rooftops right now, and y'all are hearing it here. Sales and purchasing, or whoever is doing all of the buying, needs to be working with food safety, quality, and regulatory at the beginning, at the start, to discuss and align the manual before any purchasing agreement or contracts are made. And if any of y'all here are C-suite leaders listening, I also want to highlight to y'all that yes, your food safety, quality, and regulatory teams should already be part of all of your high-level conversations. They should already have a seat at the table. They shouldn't have to go through another 2 or 3 channels to get to that. Because while we may be interested in making money from our products, we obviously want to keep people safe and continuing to buy our products. So anyway, just so you all know, the whole point of the supply chain preventive control is to do the work before an issue occurs. But first, I know that was a lot, right, Jim?
I'm telling you, I got goosebumps. I don't know about everybody else on this call. Woo!
I don't want to call people out either, right? We're just keeping it low key here. We're keeping it low key.
All right.
So first and foremost, you and your suppliers may have worked together for a long time, and like any relationship, right, we talked about, you always want to trust but verify. And to that, I do want to say it's important for y'all to consider third-party audits. Don't just trust your third-party audits, right? Because an audit is only as good as an auditor. And again, I ain't calling anyone out. I'm just saying, like, right, we all know what we should be looking for or not. But you can also, it would be very useful for you if it's been a while since you've visited your supplier to actually visit them. But instead of actually visiting them as a visit with them, consider these on-sites more like meetings and walkthroughs, like to enable a collaborative approach, right? Because here's the supplier manual. Here is what we should be doing. Are we doing it together to get you there, right? Especially if you want them to be your supplier, right? You obviously want them to be your friend. So wouldn't you want to help your friend out and understand how your friend works so you can have a better relationship? That's a whole vibe. And for why misalignments often happen, it's because it's often due to miscommunication or unclear communications with your suppliers. This might be due to a lack of visibility, or we'll talk about the supplier expectation manual itself, which is the start of all of this, right? Number one that we often see as a big potential opportunity, because we're going to use that word now, is that there are not multiple people who have read the supplier expectation manual. And oftentimes the supplier expectation manual isn't even housed in food safety quality regulatory, right? The people who should be understanding that background. It might be housed under product development. It might be housed under sales, etc. And then so that bears that next question. Has sales and purchasing talked to you about what they have written about food safety in that supplier expectation manual? And does everybody understand, right? Because something that we also notice and see that can be an opportunity is often supplier expectations manuals, and as part of that contract making, etc., there is not clear defined roles and responsibilities for what can be done, what should be done, who should be done, etc., with the appropriate training and the mentoring for employees for that role. And additionally, there's a lack of visibility into the complete picture of what allergens are being handled in the supplier facility, right? That can be part of that miscommunication. Again, it's one thing to have an allergen statement. It's another thing to actually understand what is on there. Again, that's why it's great to have on-site reviews. And perhaps you may also have a supplier complete a questionnaire or checklist identifying those aspects if you can't go on-site to work with them. But you want your receiving team to understand what they need. And sometimes there may be numerous non-compatible allergens present at your supplier, which is why they might have that may contain. If that's the case, maybe you need to maintain or reconsider what, where you're sourcing your ingredients from, what that relationship looks like, etc. You want to always follow up if your suppliers have a may contain statement for what that looks like and why and how are they or their supplier handling those ingredients and allergens themselves. We'll talk quickly about training. It's definitely very important to review your supplier's allergen training program to understand their commitment to allergen control. All right, back to the supplier expectation manual. Number one, you do not want to have multiple points of contacts for discussing different expectations and or sounding boards. Please have one centralized system and one set of group of people to talk to. So that group of people can include someone from sales, someone from FSQ and R. It can include someone from product development, etc. But it shouldn't be multiple people. Everybody who is going to be from your supplier contacting you or vice versa should be part of that conversation. Additionally, you need to make sure that everyone who needs a supplier expectations manual receives a supplier expectation manual. Do not just send it to that one person in sales or FSQ and hope that they will disseminate it to folks, because let's be real, communication is so hard and it doesn't always happen. So we want to make sure that it does, right? And you want to make sure that your supplier's expectation manual is all encompassing. And also you should understand who are the folks on your team who are supposed to approve a supplier, especially when a new change happens, right? Because no offense, we love sales, we love purchasing, but sometimes they aren't communicating that to your food safety, quality, and or regulatory teams. So having a checklist of signatures that are required for any changes coming from your supplier should be enacted so you have internal oversight, access, communication, and also communication with your suppliers. So sign-offs should always be part of that process, procedural process, especially when it's related to food safety, in order to minimize also that he said, she said, they said, or blah, 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 and sales said this, but sometimes sales didn't tell us, or maybe food safety said, got to do it this way, but they didn't tell sales, and sales is like, well, I don't know, right? We want to keep that miscommunication down because that's one of the biggest issues out there, right? So there's a concept for the supplier-customer relationship. So instead of a bow tie arrangement with a single or a few point of contacts on both sides, there should be a zipper relationship with many contacts across many technical functions between these companies, and they should always be interacting. One other few things I want to talk about supplier expectations is, number one, is your supplier expectations proofread and given to multiple units and departments for review? I'm saying I'm pointing this out low key because often when we read supplier expectation manual, first of all, it doesn't look like no one ran it through Grammarly. Just run it through Grammarly. It'll help you figure out the grammar. But not only that, different departments interpret things very differently. And if suppliers expectation manuals are for multiple departments, shouldn't we expand it so everybody understands what it is? And usually you want to pass it around internally to make sure everyone understands before you even send it to your supplier. And instead of handing off that manual in a supplier customer technical, it's better for you to have a technical meeting with all folks so that everybody on the supplier side, everyone on the customer side, all know what the expectations are, how to manually align, and the expectations for roles and responsibilities. Finally, we're going to talk about that relationship. Are you a supplier or are you thinking about your supplier's supplier, right? Ideally, we should be having more frequent discussions all the time. Check-ins, maybe via Google form, etc., right? The trust but verify process. Trusting what's going on, how that's going, having those collaborative approaches, meetings, and walkthroughs. And as a supplier, it's important to also understand what the supplier expectation manual means for you and what the different points of contacts that you might have within everybody might be, right? So you want to minimize the visibility, the lack of visibility. You want to ensure that you have all your trainings together and to have that one centralized system. And like we talked about, ideally, we want to have that more frequent check-ins. So either this can be initiated by the suppliers or by the customers, you, to determine, hey, has anything changed, etc., right? Because as we know, no matter that we have the best intentioned will out there, sometimes things slip through the pack. And so you just want to make sure that everybody is in zipper units technically together. All right. We're almost done here. I know we're running on time, but we're going to talk real quick about label verification on your end and on your supplier's end. As we talked about as well, you need to have clear defined roles and responsibilities for who is supposed to look at what labels and what is there, right? So let's talk about minimizing error. One thing that has been very helpful, especially when it comes to checking your labels, is the thinking of having a secondary person to do a check or having a two-check system where something is seen maybe by one person and then maybe scanned, where if it is scanned incorrectly and seen differently, there's a block or not block in the system before it is released, or basically having to have two sets of eyes, electronic eyes, etc., on that can be very, very useful for minimizing error. If you are labeling, you should take a picture or take that actual physical label, stick it on another piece of paper out there and saving that so that in the future you can come back and look. Another thought that you can also look at is using different types of edging for different types of labels with different types of allergens. And finally, it's also important to think about who does what types of approval, especially if you're adding a completely unique allergen to your business that hasn't been there before, and the resources and do you have the resources to ensure its safe storage and usage? So is that established? How does that look like, etc.? And unfortunately, human errors will occur. And hence we talked about it's important to have a backup. And then if you have a two-check system, also having a non-human system like label scanners as a fail-safe. Because in that, just as a reminder, The second most common allergen management and control error is label mistake, not just by you, but also by the label manufacturer. For example, having mixed label stacks, having too many labels, and label inventory mistakes by your line operators, obviously, from not discarding old labels, not storing them properly to be pulled, right? Maybe they weren't checked when they were pulled onto the production floor, so they just went right on. You copied it, assumed it was okay, kept on going. All these things can happen, so it's just something for you to think about and ways of minimizing error. All right, finally, we're going to move on to food safety culture as it relates to allergen control. Number one, communication. So important. It got to be communication with your suppliers, with your line employees, etc. Something that we will talk about, though, when it comes to embodying and incorporating that understanding comes into allergen training, right? So it's important to try to find employees with real-world experiences in dealing with food allergens and have them speak during allergen training about what it's like to not only have a food allergen for themselves, but even for those around, right? Because human behavior is one thing to know, but it's another thing to hear it from somebody that we relate to. When we hear things from people that we relate to, we're more likely to be trustful of it than we are if we just hear it on a screen over and over. So until employees without food allergens really understand the consequences of undeclared allergens, it's just an abstract hazard, right? Because for them, they could probably consume it safely. And it's hard to conceptualize common food items like milk, if you can drink dairy, as a hazard, because it's like in everything, right? So I will actually make a suggestion here. And I had a client who has so many severe allergies that actually works at a company of which many of her own allergies are present. Lol. Also like, whoa, girl, but like, yeah, slay. So one of the most impactful training that she conducts to this day, she literally brings an EpiPen to her class. And not only does she like expose herself to the allergies, she then tells her students, gives her students her EpiPen, and actually lets them EpiPen her because she's allergic, right? And if for those of y'all who have never used an EpiPen before, I just want to say it can be a very traumatic experience because in order for you to actually utilize an EpiPen, you need to take that pen and you physically stab it into either somebody's side or somebody's leg. Like you stab it in there. And it is a very quick release drug, right? To try to save the person who may be dying. But that very course of action, especially for those learners who do not have allergies or do not know anyone who does, will be a great wake-up call because it is not only a physical action, you are learning in real life. I almost said IRL and realized that was probably too much alphabet soup. But that real life action is what embodies that knowledge and incorporates that understanding. I'm not saying that you find somebody on your team who's madly allergic and then you expose them and have them be stabbed. That's not what I'm saying. That is just one of the many ways that really drives allergens and allergen control and the importance of it for not killing somebody to people's brains. And so that also leads to positive food safety culture, right? Because are you, for example, at your company also saying, hey, homie, you cannot bring like peanuts or something to the facility, blah, blah, blah. How does that look like, etc. So these are all aspects for you to consider. But when we talk about food safety culture, we really want to embody everything together so that everybody understands why food allergies are absolutely important. So as we're tying up this conversation today, I definitely want to highlight, number one, trust but verify. We can trust that there are not allergens, but we should always verify, whether it is with ourselves, understanding how our lines are doing, everything else that's around this, etc. This is really important. How are our lines doing? How are our labels made? How is this all being produced? How are the trainings done? What are our suppliers doing? All of that. And yeah, ultimately go out there and make the delicious foods. We love it and we're here for it. All right. I think that brings me to the end. Thank you all for listening. I hope this was helpful.
Oh my goodness. I can't tell you. Jam-packed, but very, very, very good stuff, Lily. Thank you so much. And yes, we have a few minutes here, so I'm going to just dive in really quick. I wanted to clarify something I think you said in the early part of your presentation, which was around, labels don't really cover all the bases. You can have a label on there, but it's not going to save you from a potential issue down the line. So even if you have something like might contain or was produced in a facility, it is not going to cover you if there is some type of recall situation or foodborne illness that gets outreached.
That's affirmative. Yes.
So if that's the case, is there any other? I know you walked us through so many different like preventative controls and different scenarios, but is there any other communication that can be added to a label or food product where the consumer is without a doubt alerted that there could be, maybe not absolute, but there could be a risk?
Well, unfortunately, that is the only thing you could add. But then, like, you would be trying to do your best to prevent that risk. And so, this is where it's so important to have a good prerequisite program for your allergens, for your cleaning, sanitizing, for your cleaning activities, etc. Like, if those things are on point, then your question should be to yourself, why am I still including this label? Because, again, right, to that point.
Right.
Yeah. And obviously, to the other point, as a person making a product, like, you want to also just make sure what's on that label is what's in that product, right? It should be one-to-one. It shouldn't be like, oh, but it also might, right? And if you want your folks to know that it could be made in a facility with XYZ, and then they can make that decision of themselves if they want to purchase your product or not, then heck yeah, you definitely should include that may include label, right? So this, when it comes to, is also a decision on how you feel. Well, no, what you know, not what you feel, right? Because feelings are fake, but like what you actually is happening is real. What you are doing and understanding that, but also your commitment to helping your clients or your customers know the full picture, right? Because in that regard, there is something to be said about including, may include, etc. Because there may be folks who really will not purchase it because they are so afraid of it, and that's okay. We should still make that available and that knowledge available to them. That would be good communication and good business.
Right. Yeah. And another point you had made, this goes back to some personal experience you had where you said allergen hazard analysis isn't necessarily either done effectively or done well.
Yes.
And, that's interesting. And you gave us a few examples where I forget what it was, like corn husk or something like that was in a cleaner.
Yeah.
So your later point around how, you should really check for allergens outside of areas that may not include allergens. You may not even be working with sesame seeds or oils or something like that, but still do allergen swabs to double check. I thought that was interesting. And the other point too was, how do you actually clean everything? I know you can see it, but like you said, you can't get under every screw. You can't maybe disassemble every piece of equipment. How do you know that you're effectively, truly cleaning?
So you could do a validation of that cleaning process, and you should work with your like sanitation crew as well as your chemical suppliers, or even if you have a third party sanitation crew, working with them to help understand and identify, pulling in again your maintenance crew because they actually know what's going on with each piece of equipment. They should pulling in the folks who made the equipment to ask them, like, how would you suggest blah, 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 blah in accordance with XYZ? Those kind of aspects would also be super helpful.
Yes, agreed. All right. So I know we're running out of time here. Just wanted to, put an exclamation point on the make your labeling accessible. I love your idea using pictograms, multi-language. Make sure, not everybody, sees and understands things the way that we do. I love that. So thank you. And also, as you said before, when it comes to supplier relationships and understanding that supplier expectation manual, if it's held with sales or purchasing, make sure everybody is aware of what this means. Make sure that that's communicated out throughout, those suppliers that you're dealing with and their suppliers. So that is often, one of the reasons, like you said, mislabeling or cross-contamination or supplier related, it definitely comes, well before it even gets into the four walls of your plant. And then one final point, sign-offs. You said sign-offs are critical. Make sure that you are tagging everything, tracking everything, and have the proper authorities signed off on those activities and actions. Yes. Awesome stuff. Lily, I can't thank you enough. Again, like we could be here, for many hours more, probably over. We'll probably have to do this again because this is such a great topic. But All right, I'm going to leave you all again. We have a QR code here. If you have your phone ready, you can snap a picture and that'll take you to the survey. And if you take this survey, it shouldn't take you more than 15, 20 minutes at most. The survey is designed to kind of highlight some of the key data challenges that you might be having in your plant. Whether you're in FSQA or you're in operations, or maybe you're the head of the business, there are some silos happening. It's inherent everywhere. And this survey helps you break down some of the methods that your peers throughout the food and beverage industry and supply chain are trying to eliminate some of those silos and consolidate the data and build more visibility throughout. That kind of harkens back to your communication point. So click that QR code. There is that URL right there you can check out. And of course, again, Lily, we want to thank you for being our expert on today's topic. There's so much more to talk about. You can head on over to the Acheson Group at achesongroup.com. There's a million resources that they have there from the experts, just like Lily, that you can take advantage of. And of course, their podcast Tag Talks. And at safetychain.com, where there is a library of resources that we have developed in collaboration with our friends over at Tag that you can access and help your facility and also, again, share with your friends and your peers in your organizations. These are all great things. So thank you, everybody, for joining us today. This has been a really exciting and fun presentation, Lily. We love you. Come back. Have a great weekend, everybody, and we'll see you on the next FSMA Friday.
Thank you. Bye.
Take care.